On a cold Tuesday night in Millbrook Heights, Alger Boulevard's life was about to change forever. A single father working 3 jobs to keep his family from drowning in debt, he never expected to become a hero. But when he saw 2 masked men cornering a woman in the parking garage beneath his apartment building, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed the tire iron from his beat-up Honda and charged forward, risking everything to save a complete stranger. Little did he know that this woman wasn't just another victim of urban crime. She was someone whose identity would turn his world completely upside down. 3 days later, a private helicopter would land on the roof of Millbrook General Hospital, bringing with it an offer so impossible, so life-altering, that Alger would question whether he was still living in reality. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in the parking garage flickered ominously as Alger hurried toward his car, his nursing scrubs still damp with sweat from another grueling 12-hour shift at Millbrook General. His phone buzzed constantly, text after text from his babysitter asking when he'd be home, reminders about his daughter Maya's school supplies that needed buying, and a voicemail from his son Diego's teacher about a parent conference he couldn't afford to miss work for. At 32, Alger felt like he was already 50, carrying the weight of responsibilities that seemed to multiply faster than his paychecks. The parking garage was mostly empty at 11:47 p.m., just a few scattered cars belonging to the night shift workers like herself. Elena fumbled for her keys, mentally calculating whether she had enough gas to make it through the week. Her tip money from her weekend waitressing job at Rosario's Diner would have to stretch to cover Maya's school lunch account and Diego's basketball shoes that were falling apart. The third job, cleaning offices on Thursday nights, barely covered the interest on her student loans from nursing school. That's when she heard it. A woman's voice, sharp with fear. "Please, just take whatever you want, but don't hurt me." Elena froze, her keys halfway to the car door. Through the maze of concrete pillars, she could see 2 figures in dark hoodies cornering someone near the elevator bank. The woman was well-dressed. Even in the dim lighting, Elena could tell her clothes were expensive. Designer purse, elegant posture despite the obvious terror in her voice. "The watch too, lady, and those earrings. Everything valuable now." One of the men stepped closer, and Elena caught the glint of metal in his hand, a knife. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She should call 911. She should get in her car and drive away. She had 2 children who needed their mother to come home safely. But as she watched the woman's shoulders shake with fear, Elena thought of Maya and Diego sleeping peacefully in their beds, trusting that their mother would always protect them. How could she live with herself if she let someone else's mother, daughter, or sister get hurt when she could have helped? Her hand found the tire iron in her trunk. She'd bought it after her last flat tire, knowing she couldn't afford roadside assistance. The cold metal felt heavier than usual as she gripped it tightly. "Hey!" Elena's voice echoed through the garage as she stepped out from behind her car. "Back off!" The 2 men spun around, clearly not expecting company. In the split second of their surprise, Elena got her first clear look at the woman they were robbing. Even terrified and pressed against the concrete wall, there was something striking about her. Not just her obvious wealth, but an air of quiet strength beneath the fear. "Walk away, lady," the first robber snarled, raising his knife. "This ain't your business." "Actually, it became my business the moment you decided to commit a crime in my building," Elena replied, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. She raised the tire iron, hoping they couldn't see how badly her hands were shaking. What happened next unfolded like a scene from an action movie. The first robber lunged at Elena, but her years of working physically demanding jobs had made her stronger than she looked. She sidestepped and brought the tire iron down on his wrist, sending the knife clattering across the concrete. The second robber grabbed for the woman's purse, but she finally found her voice. "Security! Help! Someone call the police!" Her shouts echoed through the garage, and suddenly the sound of running footsteps filled the air as the building's security guard finally responded to the commotion. The 2 robbers exchanged panicked looks and bolted for the stairwell, leaving behind only the knife and a few scattered bills that had fallen from the woman's purse. Elena dropped the tire iron, her whole body shaking with adrenaline. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" The woman straightened slowly, smoothing down her hair with trembling hands. I'm fine, thanks to you." Her voice carried a slight accent that Elena couldn't place. That was incredibly brave. And incredibly foolish. They could have killed you. Yeah, well, Elena managed a shaky laugh. My kids say I'm too stubborn for my own good. The woman studied Elena's face in the harsh fluorescent light, taking in the tired lines around her eyes, the hospital ID badge still clipped to her scrubs, the worn sneakers that had seen too many double shifts. You have children? 2. Maya's 8, Diego's 12. They're probably wondering where I am right now. Something shifted in the woman's expression, a flash of emotion that Elena couldn't quite read. What's your name? Elena Rodriguez. Elena Rodriguez, the woman repeated, as if committing it to memory. I'm going to remember that name. The security guard finally appeared, followed by the wail of sirens in the distance. As Elena gave her statement to the police, she kept catching glimpses of the woman she'd saved, speaking quietly on an expensive-looking phone, her composure returning with each passing minute. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way others seemed to defer to her, that suggested she was used to being in control. As Elena finally headed home at nearly 2 a.m., she had no idea that the woman she'd saved had already made several phone calls. She had no idea that her life was about to become the subject of investigation by some of the most powerful people in the country. She had no idea that in 3 days, everything she thought she knew about her future would change forever. All Elena knew was that she'd done the right thing, and her children would be proud of their mother for standing up to bullies, just like she'd taught them to do. She never could have imagined that the woman she'd saved was about to make her an offer that would challenge everything she believed about love, marriage, and the kind of life a single mother from Millbrook Heights could dare to dream of. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The alarm clock's shrill beeping cut through Alger Boulevard's dreams at 5:30 a.m., just 3.5 hours after he'd finally fallen asleep. His body protested as he rolled out of the narrow single bed, every muscle aching from the previous night's confrontation in the parking garage. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind only exhaustion and the nagging worry that always lived in the back of his mind. How was he going to make it through another day? The stack of bills on his kitchen counter seemed to have multiplied overnight, like some cruel magic trick performed by the universe. Past due notices in aggressive red ink, final warnings printed on yellow paper, and payment plans that stretched his meager income, thinner than tissue paper. Alger rubbed his eyes and picked up the electricity bill, $347.82, due in 3 days. His last paycheck from the hospital had been $892 after taxes, and that had to cover rent, groceries, gas, Maya's asthma medication, and Diego's school lunch account that was already overdrawn. Dad? Maya's sleepy voice drifted from the hallway. At 8 years old, she was too observant for her own good, always picking up on the stress that Alger tried so hard to hide. Are you okay? You look tired. Alger quickly shuffled the bills into a neat pile and turned on his best father smile, the one he'd perfected over the past 4 years since becoming a single parent. Just getting ready for work, sweetheart. Did you brush your teeth? Maya nodded, her curly hair still messy from sleep. She wore the same princess pajamas she'd had for 2 years, the fabric faded and the sleeves too short, but she'd refused to let him throw them away. Diego's still sleeping. He stayed up late doing homework again. The guilt hit Alger like a physical punch. Diego, at 12, was already showing signs of growing up too fast, taking on responsibilities that should have been Alger's, helping Maya with her homework when Alger was working his second or third job, making sure his little sister had dinner when their father didn't get home until after bedtime. It wasn't fair to either of them, but fair was a luxury Alger couldn't afford. The morning routine was a carefully choreographed dance of survival. While Maya ate her bowl of generic cereal, the off-brand kind that cost half as much as the name brands but tasted like cardboard, Alger packed their lunches. 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, an apple split between them, and whatever snacks he could find in the pantry. He made a mental note to stop by the food bank after his shift at the diner tonight. Dad, Diego emerged from the bedroom he shared with Maya, his 12-year-old frame already showing signs of the growth spurt that was stretching their budget even thinner. His jeans were an inch too short, and his sneakers had a hole near the toe that Alger had tried to fix with duct tape. Mrs. Patterson wants to talk to you about the math competition. She says I have a real shot at winning." Alger's heart swelled with pride, even as his stomach tightened with worry. Diego was brilliant, scary brilliant, with numbers and problem-solving. His teachers constantly praised his potential, talking about scholarships and advanced programs and opportunities that sounded like fairy tales to a single father working 3 jobs. But math competitions meant entry fees, transportation, maybe even overnight trips that Alger simply couldn't afford. "That's amazing, buddy. We'll figure something out," Alger said, the same phrase he used whenever his children's dreams collided with their reality. Diego's smile dimmed slightly. He was old enough to understand what "we'll figure something out" usually meant. The drive to school was quiet, filled with the unspoken worries that seemed to follow their family everywhere. Alger's Honda Civic made concerning noises every time he pressed the brake, and the check engine light had been on for 3 months. One major repair bill would completely destroy their precarious financial balance, but he couldn't afford not to have a car, not with 3 jobs scattered across the city. After dropping off the kids, Alger sat in the hospital parking lot for a moment, staring at the building where he spent most of his waking hours. Millbrook General wasn't a bad place to work. The nurses were professional, the doctors mostly respected the staff, and the patients genuinely needed his help. But the pay for a registered nurse, even with overtime, wasn't enough to support a family in a city where rent ate up 60% of his income. His phone buzzed with a text from Rosa, the babysitter who watched Maya and Diego when Alger worked his evening shifts. "Can you pay me today? My car payment is due." Another reminder of how his financial struggles rippled outward, affecting the people who helped him survive. Alger closed his eyes and allowed himself exactly 30 seconds of despair, a technique he developed over the years of single parenthood. 30 seconds to feel overwhelmed, exhausted, and defeated. Then he straightened his shoulders, grabbed his nursing badge from the dashboard, and walked into the hospital. The pediatric ward was where Alger felt most at home, working with children who reminded him of Maya and Diego. Today he was assigned to help Dr. Chen with a young patient recovering from heart surgery, a 7-year-old girl whose parents looked as tired and worried as Alger felt every day. As he checked her vitals and adjusted her IV, he thought about how different their situations were. This family had insurance, resources, support systems. When their child was sick, they could focus entirely on her recovery instead of worrying about how to pay for it. "You're good with her," Dr. Chen observed, watching Alger gently explain to the little girl why she needed to keep her oxygen mask on. "Have you ever considered specializing in pediatric care? There are advanced certification programs that could lead to better positions, higher pay." Alger nodded politely, but inside he was calculating. Advanced certification meant classes, which meant time away from his second and third jobs, which meant less money when he was already barely keeping their heads above water. It was the same impossible cycle that trapped so many people, needing money to make money, needing time to invest in the future when survival demanded every minute of the present. As his shift ended and he prepared to head to his second job at Romano's Diner, Alger had no idea that the woman he'd saved in the parking garage had spent the entire day learning everything there was to know about him. He had no idea that private investigators were already documenting his character, his work ethic, his devotion to his children. He had no idea that by tomorrow, his ordinary world of struggle and survival was about to be turned completely upside down. For now, he was just a single father trying to make it through another day, one bill at a time, one shift at a time, one small sacrifice at a time, holding on to the hope that somehow, someday, things would get better for his children. 2 days after the parking garage incident, Alger's routine was disrupted by something he'd never experienced before: media attention. It started small, with a brief mention on the local morning news about a Good Samaritan who'd intervened in an armed robbery. The reporter didn't have his name, just a vague description and security footage too grainy to make out details. Alger barely noticed it as he rushed through his morning routine, more focused on the fact that Maya's inhaler was running low and he needed to figure out how to afford a refill before his insurance kicked in next month. The first sign that something was different came during his lunch break at the hospital. Alger was sitting in the staff cafeteria, mechanically eating a peanut butter sandwich he'd packed from home, when his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, is this Alger Boulevard?" The voice was professional, female, with a slight accent he couldn't place. "Yes, who's asking?" My name is Dr. Valentina Cross from the Thornfield Medical Research Foundation. I'm calling because we've received some information about your involvement in preventing a crime earlier this week. Alger nearly choked on his sandwich. I'm sorry, what? How did you… Mr. Boulevard, would you be available for a brief conversation? Perhaps we could meet somewhere private. There are some matters we'd like to discuss regarding your actions, and potentially some opportunities that might interest you. The word opportunities sent a chill down Alger's spine. In his experience, when strangers called talking about opportunities, it usually meant someone was trying to sell him something he couldn't afford, or rope him into something that was too good to be true. I appreciate the call, but I'm not interested in whatever you're selling, Alger started to say. Mr. Boulevard, I'm not selling anything. I represent someone who was very grateful for your intervention the other night. Someone who would like to express that gratitude in person, if you're willing. After a long pause, Alger found himself agreeing to meet Dr. Cross at a coffee shop near the hospital after his shift. He told himself it was just curiosity, but deep down, a small part of him, the part that bought lottery tickets despite knowing the odds, wondered if maybe, just maybe, something good was finally going to happen. The afternoon at the hospital dragged by with unusual tension. Twice, Alger caught glimpses of well-dressed strangers in the hallways who seemed out of place among the usual chaos of medical professionals and worried families. A woman in an expensive suit talking quietly on her phone near the elevator. A man in a perfectly tailored jacket observing the nurses, stationed from a distance. When Alger tried to get a closer look, they seemed to disappear into the crowd. His paranoia reached new heights when he received a text from Diego's school. Please call regarding your son's early dismissal today. Alger's heart raced as he dialed the number, imagining every possible catastrophe. Mr. Boulevard? The school secretary's voice was unusually cheerful. We just wanted to let you know that Diego was selected for a special math enrichment program today. A representative from the Thornfield Education Initiative came by with some supplementary materials and wanted to discuss Diego's exceptional test scores. The what initiative? I didn't sign any permission slips for. Oh, it was just an informational meeting, nothing that required permission. Diego is back in his regular classes now. Such a bright boy you have there. Alger hung up, his hands shaking slightly. Thornfield, the same name Dr. Cross had mentioned. This wasn't a coincidence. When Maya's daycare called an hour later to mention that a very nice woman had stopped by asking about enrollment procedures and commenting on what a delightful, intelligent child Maya was, Alger knew for certain that whatever was happening was bigger than a simple thank you for helping someone in a parking garage. He left work early, something he'd never done in his 4 years at Millbrook General, claiming a family emergency. The drive to Maya's daycare felt like the longest 20 minutes of his life. Every expensive car on the road looked suspicious. Every person in a business suit seemed to be watching him. Maya bounded out of daycare with her usual enthusiasm, chattering about her day as if nothing unusual had happened. There was a really pretty lady who came to visit today, Daddy. She had shiny hair and she knew my name. She said I was very smart and asked Miss Jennifer about what kinds of books I like to read. Alger knelt down to Maya's level, trying to keep his voice calm. Did this lady talk to you directly, sweetheart? Just to say hi. Miss Jennifer said she was a teacher from a fancy school. She had a really nice car. It was silver and looked like the ones in movies. The coffee shop Dr. Cross had suggested was one of those upscale places where a single latte cost more than Alger usually spent on lunch for a week. He arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table where he could watch the entrance. Maya was with Rosa, the babysitter, and Diego was at basketball practice. But Alger's phone was fully charged and ready to call them at the first sign of trouble. Dr. Valentina Cross was impossible to miss when she walked in. Tall, elegant, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, she moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money or security. Her clothes were understated but obviously expensive, the kind of outfit that probably cost more than Alger made in a month. She spotted him immediately and approached with a warm smile that somehow managed to be both genuine and slightly intimidating. Mr. Boulevard, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me. Her handshake was firm, her accent now clearly European, maybe Swiss or Austrian. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering you a coffee. The barista recommended their signature blend. As if on cue, a server appeared with two elaborate coffee drinks that Alger was certain he couldn't pronounce, let alone afford. "Dr. Cross, I'll be honest with you, I don't know what this is about, but if someone's been watching my children—" "Please, call me Valentina. And I completely understand your concern. You're a protective father, which is exactly what made my employer notice you in the first place." She leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. "What you did 2 nights ago, putting yourself at risk to help a complete stranger, that says something about your character. Something rare and valuable. Your employer? The woman you saved from those criminals. She asked me to find you, to learn about you, because she wanted to understand what kind of person would risk their life for someone they'd never met." Alger shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Look, I just did what anyone would do. I don't need thanks or rewards or whatever this is leading up to." Valentina smiled, but there was something almost sad in her expression. "Mr. Boulevard, if what you did was what anyone would do, why were you the only one who acted? There were other people in that garage. Security cameras show at least 3 other residents who saw what was happening and chose to look the away." The question hung in the air between them. Alger had never thought about it that way. "My employer is a very private person, but she's also someone who believes in recognizing exceptional character when she sees it. She'd like to meet you, to thank you properly, and to discuss some possibilities that might benefit both you and your children." "What kind of possibilities?" Valentina reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, thick, expensive paper with a wax seal. She'd prefer to explain that herself. "But I can tell you this much. She's someone who has the resources to make a real difference in your life, and the motivation to do so." Alger stared at the envelope, his mind racing. Everything about this situation felt surreal, like he'd stepped into someone else's life. Why me? Why go to all this trouble for someone you don't even know? Because sometimes, Mr. Boulevard, the measure of a person isn't found in their resume or their bank account. Sometimes it's found in a split-second decision to help someone in need, even when you have everything to lose and nothing to gain. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, as Alger turned it over in his hands. His name was written on the front in elegant script, and the wax seal bore an intricate design he didn't recognize. "What happens if I say no? What happens if I just walk away from whatever this is?" Valentina's expression softened. "Then you go back to your life, and we disappear completely. No one will bother you or your children again." "But Alger. May I call you Alger? I think you'd regret not at least hearing what she has to say." Outside the coffee shop, the sun was setting over Millbrook Heights, casting long shadows across the parking lot where Alger's beat-up Honda sat next to Valentina's sleek BMW. In a few hours, he'd need to pick up Maya from Rosa's, help Diego with homework, and try to figure out how to stretch their grocery budget through the end of the week. But for the first time in years, he was holding something that felt like possibility. The envelope sat unopened on Alger's kitchen counter for 3 days, taunting him every time he walked past. He'd moved it several times, from the counter to the table, from the table to his bedroom dresser, and finally back to the kitchen, where it seemed to demand his attention each morning as he made breakfast for Maya and Diego. The elegant handwriting and mysterious wax seal felt completely out of place in their modest apartment, like finding a Rolex in a box of cereal. On Friday evening, as Alger was helping Diego with his algebra homework while Maya practiced reading aloud from a library book, his phone rang. Unknown number again, but this time he recognized Dr. Cross's voice immediately. "Alger, I hope I'm not interrupting your family time. I wanted to check if you'd had a chance to consider our conversation." Through the kitchen window, Alger could see a black sedan parked across the street, the same one that had been there on and off since Wednesday. He'd convinced himself he was being paranoid, but the timing of this call felt too convenient. "Dr. Cross, I need to ask you something directly. Are you having me watched?" There was a pause. "I understand your concern. Yes, there is security present, but not for surveillance, for protection. My employer has reason to believe that the criminals from the parking garage may have identified you from news reports. We're simply ensuring your family's safety." Alger's blood ran cold. "What news reports? What are you talking about? You haven't seen them? Local news picked up the story yesterday. Someone submitted the security footage from your building. Your face is clearly visible, and they've been asking viewers to help identify the mystery hero." Rushing to his laptop, Alger quickly pulled up the local news website. There it was, front and center. Hero sought. Man saves woman from armed robbers. The security footage was grainy but unmistakable. He could clearly see himself charging forward with the tire iron, and the timestamp showed his license plate as he drove away afterward. He roared, "Dad, that's you!" Diego had appeared beside him, staring at the screen in amazement. "You're on the news! Maya, come look!" As his children crowded around the computer, chattering excitedly about their father being a real-life superhero, Alger felt his world shift beneath his feet. The story had been shared hundreds of times on social media, with comments ranging from praise for his bravery to speculation about his identity. Several people had already posted photos of his apartment building, and one commenter had mentioned seeing the same Honda Civic in the hospital parking lot. "Dr. Cross," Alger said quietly, moving away from his children. "How serious is this threat?" "Serious enough that my employer insists on providing protection until the situation is resolved. The men from the garage have been identified. They're part of a larger criminal organization with a history of retaliation against witnesses. We believe they've already started looking for you." That night, after putting Maya and Diego to bed with extra hugs and reassurances that everything was fine, Alger finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address in the wealthy Riverside district and a time: Saturday, 2 p.m. Come alone. Park in the visitor space marked AB. Your children will be safe with Dr. Cross during our meeting. The paper smelled faintly of expensive perfume, and the address was embossed with the same intricate seal from the envelope. At the bottom, in the same elegant handwriting, was a simple signature: C. Saturday morning brought an unusual level of chaos to their apartment. Diego had been selected for an emergency math tutoring session with a special instructor who would help him prepare for the upcoming state competition, all expenses paid by an anonymous education foundation. Maya had been invited to a, quote, princess science camp at the Children's Museum, where she would spend the day learning about chemistry through fairy tale experiments. "It's like Christmas and my birthday together." Maya spun around in her best dress, the one they'd bought secondhand for her school picture day. "Dr. Valentina said there will be real princess dresses to wear and we get to make magic potions." Dr. Cross arrived at precisely 11 a.m., dressed more casually than before, but still radiating that aura of quiet authority. She brought with her a team of what she called educational specialists, friendly, professional people who immediately captured both children's attention with promises of adventure and learning. "Dad, you sure you don't want to come with us?" Diego asked, but Alger could see the excitement in his son's eyes. These people were offering his children experiences he could never afford: specialized tutoring, museum programs, individual attention from experts. "I have some adult stuff to take care of, buddy. You and Maya have fun and tell me everything when you get back, okay?" As he watched Dr. Cross's team drive away with his children in vehicles that probably cost more than his annual salary, Alger felt the weight of what he was about to walk into. Whatever awaited him at that Riverside address, it was clearly being orchestrated by someone with enormous resources and a very specific interest in his family. The Riverside district was like entering a different world. Manicured lawns, circular driveways, houses that looked more like small palaces than homes. Alger's Honda felt embarrassingly out of place among the luxury cars parked along the tree-lined streets. The address led him to a gated estate that seemed to stretch for acres, with gardens that probably required more maintenance than Alger spent on rent. The visitor space marked AB was right at the front gate, almost as if it had been waiting for him specifically. As he parked, Alger noticed security cameras tracking his movement, and a uniformed guard emerged from a small gatehouse. "Mr. Boulevard, please follow me. You are expected." The walk to the main house felt like a journey through a luxury resort. Fountains, perfectly trimmed hedges, and flower beds that must have cost thousands to maintain. The house itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all glass and steel and clean lines that somehow managed to feel both impressive and welcoming. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman Alger almost didn't recognize. Gone were the expensive but conservative clothes from the parking garage. Instead, she wore a simple white dress that somehow made her look younger and more approachable, though no less elegant. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, and she moved with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. "Alger," she said, and her voice carried the same slight accent he remembered from that terrifying night. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't entirely sure you would." Up close, in daylight, she was strikingly beautiful in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. Intelligent, intense, and filled with something he couldn't quite identify. Gratitude, certainly, but something else. Something that looked almost like hope? "I have to admit, I'm not sure what I'm doing here," Alger said honestly. "This whole thing feels like I've stepped into someone else's life." She smiled, and for just a moment he saw a flash of the vulnerability he'd glimpsed in the parking garage. "Perhaps that's exactly what's happening. Would you like to come inside? We have a great deal to discuss, and I suspect you have quite a few questions." As they walked through the foyer, a space larger than his entire apartment, with art on the walls that Alger was certain belonged in museums, he caught sight of several other people in the house. Staff, security, advisors perhaps. All moving with quiet efficiency, all clearly focused on this meeting. "Before we go any further," the woman said, stopping in front of a pair of double doors that led to what looked like a library, "I should properly introduce myself. My name is Celestine Ashworth, and I believe I'm about to change your life in ways you never imagined possible." She paused, her hand on the door handle, and looked at him with an expression that was part nervous, part determined. "But first, I need to know, are you ready to hear something that might sound completely impossible?" The library was a work of art in itself. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes that looked both ancient and precious, leather furniture that probably cost more than Alger's annual salary, and windows that offered a panoramic view of gardens that seemed to stretch to the horizon. But what caught his attention immediately was the wall of photographs behind Celestine's massive mahogany desk. Dozens of images showing the same woman, Celestine, in various locations around the world, shaking hands with people in business suits, cutting ribbons at what looked like hospital openings, standing beside construction sites with hard hats and blueprints. In several photos, she was surrounded by children in what appeared to be schools or medical facilities, her smile genuine and warm. "Please, sit," Celestine gestured to a chair across from her desk, but instead of taking her place behind it, she settled into the matching chair beside his. "I want to have this conversation as equals, not as, well, what this might appear to be." "And what might this appear to be?" Alger asked, still trying to process the opulence surrounding him. A wealthy woman attempting to buy something from a man who needs money. Her directness was startling. Which, I suppose, is exactly what this is, in a way, though not in the way you might think. She reached for a folder on the side table, thick, professional, with his name printed on the cover in gold letters. Alger Boulevard, 32 years old, registered nurse at Millbrook General Hospital for 4 years. Previously worked construction, specifically electrical systems, before returning to school for nursing. Father to Maya, 8, and Diego, 12. Widowed when your wife Carmen died in a car accident 4 years ago, leaving you with significant medical debt from her emergency surgeries. Alger's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "You investigated me." "Thoroughly," she admitted without apology. "Your credit score is 542. Primarily due to medical bills totaling $127,000 that you've been paying down at $200 per month for the past 4 years. You work additional shifts at Romano's Diner on weekends and clean office buildings on Thursday nights. Despite working 70 hours a week, your monthly income barely covers basic expenses." The clinical recitation of his failures felt like physical blows. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I need you to understand that I know exactly who you are before I tell you what I'm about to tell you." Celestine leaned forward, her expression intense. "Alger, what would you say if I told you that your actions in that parking garage 2 weeks ago didn't just save me from a robbery, they saved my life?" "I'd say that's a bit dramatic. They had a knife, sure, but..." "The knife was poisoned." The words hit him like ice water. "Those weren't random criminals, Alger. They were assassins sent by people who want me dead. If they had cut me, even a small wound would have been fatal within minutes." Alger stared at her, struggling to process what she was saying. "Assassins? Who are you that someone would want to?" "My full name is Celestine Ashworth Montenegro. I'm the sole heir to the Montenegro pharmaceutical fortune, currently valued at approximately $14 billion. She said it matter-of-factly, as if she were discussing the weather. "More importantly, I control the Montenegro Foundation, which funds medical research and humanitarian projects in 43 countries. The number was so large it didn't seem real, 14 billion. Alger had never even seen $1 million, let alone imagine someone who possessed thousands of times that amount. The people who tried to kill me represent certain pharmaceutical companies who would prefer that my foundation's research remain limited. We're on the verge of several breakthrough treatments that could revolutionize healthcare for the poor and underserved. Treatments that would cost pennies to produce instead of thousands of dollars. Celestine stood and moved to the wall of photographs, touching one that showed her surrounded by children in what looked like a refugee camp. 3 years ago, my research teams developed a treatment for a rare childhood cancer that affects primarily children in developing countries. The treatment costs $12 to produce. American pharmaceutical companies charge $40,000 for the same medication. You're talking about corporate espionage, murder, Alger's voice felt hoarse. I'm talking about an industry where profit margins matter more than human lives, where a medication that could save thousands of children is priced so high that only the wealthy can afford it. She turned back to him, her eyes blazing with passion. My foundation exists to change that, to ensure that money never determines who lives and who dies. But what does any of this have to do with me? Celestine returned to her chair, pulling out another folder, this one labeled Family Security Assessment. After you saved my life, I had you investigated not just for your character, but for your vulnerabilities. Alger, those same people who tried to kill me now know who you are. They know about Maya and Diego. They know where you work, where your children go to school, every detail of your daily routine. The blood drained from Alger's face. Are you saying my children are in danger because I helped you? I'm saying that your family is now a target because you possess something these people consider a threat, my gratitude. They know I'm the type of person who repays debts, and they're concerned about what that might mean. Alger shot to his feet, pacing toward the windows. Then I need to take my kids and leave, go somewhere they can't find us. With what resources? Your savings account has $347 in it. Your credit cards are maxed out. You can't even afford to miss a week of work, let alone relocate your family to somewhere safe. The hopelessness of his situation crashed over him like a wave. She was right. He was trapped by his own poverty, unable to protect his children from dangers he'd inadvertently brought into their lives. But, Celestine continued softly, I can. What are you proposing? She stood and moved to her desk, pulling out a document that looked like a legal contract. I'm proposing a solution that addresses both of our problems. I need someone I can trust absolutely. Someone whose character I've witnessed firsthand. Someone with no connections to the pharmaceutical industry or its corruption. You need resources to protect your family and provide them with the future they deserve. I'm a nurse, not a bodyguard or a businessman. You're a father who would risk his life for a stranger. You're a man who works 70 hours a week to pay down debts you shouldn't have to carry. You're someone who understands what it means to choose between medication and groceries, between your child's future and your current survival. Celestine's voice grew stronger with each word. I don't need someone with an MBA, Alger. I need someone with a conscience. She placed the contract on the table between them. I'm offering you a position as Director of Family Services for the Montenegro Foundation. Your job would be to oversee our programs that provide direct support to families affected by medical crises, families like yours. The salary is $200,000 annually, plus full benefits, plus housing allowance, plus education funds for Maya and Diego. Alger's vision blurred as he stared at the numbers. $200,000 was more than he'd made in the past 3 years combined. There's more, Celestine said quietly. The position comes with a comprehensive security package. Round-the-clock protection for your family until the current threat is eliminated. A new identity if necessary. Relocation to a secure community where Maya and Diego can attend the best schools without fear. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do this for someone you barely know? Celestine was quiet for a long moment, staring out at her gardens. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of emotion he hadn't heard before. Because 3 years ago, my younger brother was killed in a car accident. He was driving to the hospital where our foundation was funding a new pediatric wing. The last thing he said to me was that he'd found someone, a nurse, who truly understood what our work meant. Someone who cared for sick children not because it was a job, but because it was a calling. She turned to face him, and Alger saw tears in her eyes for the first time. "That nurse was your wife, Carmen. My brother spent the last week of his life talking about a woman who worked double shifts to pay for her own medical care, but still volunteered her time to comfort families who couldn't afford proper treatment. He said she was the kind of person our foundation existed to support and to learn from." The room seemed to spin around Alger as the implications hit him. Carmen never mentioned. She wouldn't have. It was a private conversation, and she died before my brother could arrange the scholarship program he wanted to establish in her honor. Celestine wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "When I saw you risk your life for a stranger in that parking garage, when I learned who you were, I realized that fate had given me a chance to honor both her memory and his." Alger sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the connections, the coincidences, the sheer impossibility of what he was hearing. "So you see," Celestine continued, "this isn't charity, Alger. This is destiny. This is a chance for both of us to build something meaningful from tragedy, to ensure that other families don't have to choose between survival and dignity the way you have." Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the library. Somewhere across the city, Maya and Diego were having the time of their lives, experiencing opportunities that felt like fairy tales. And here, in this room that felt like something from a dream itself, a woman who controlled billions of dollars was offering to change their lives forever. But as Alger looked at the contract, one question burned in his mind. What was she not telling him? Alger asked for the weekend to think it over, though every rational part of his mind screamed that he was insane for not signing immediately. As Dr. Cross drove him back to his apartment in a vehicle that probably had more safety features than a presidential limousine, his head spun with everything Celestine had revealed. $14 billion. Carmen's connection to her brother. Assassins with poisoned knives. A job offer that would solve every financial problem he'd ever had. But something felt off, like a puzzle piece that almost fit but left tiny gaps around the edges. Maya and Diego were practically glowing when they returned that evening, chattering over each other about their respective adventures. Maya had apparently spent the day with actual scientists, making rainbow chemicals and learning about molecular structures through what she called princess chemistry. Diego was quieter but clearly energized, clutching a leather portfolio filled with advanced mathematics problems that he claimed were actually fun to solve. "Dad, did you know that Dr. Cross used to teach at Harvard?" Diego said as they ate the Chinese takeout that had mysteriously appeared in their refrigerator, along with groceries that Alger definitely hadn't bought and couldn't have afforded. "She said I could probably test into college-level mathematics by the time I'm 16 if I had the right tutoring. And Miss Rebecca, she's a real chemist, Dad. She said I have natural intuition for scientific thinking," Maya added, her eyes bright with excitement. "She gave me this." She held up a child-sized lab coat with her name embroidered on the pocket. "She said if I keep studying science, maybe someday I could help sick people get better, just like you do." Alger watched his children's faces, seeing something he hadn't seen in years. Pure joy in learning, excitement about possibilities beyond their current circumstances. When was the last time either of them had talked about the future in terms of what they wanted to become rather than what they couldn't afford? That night, after putting the kids to bed, Alger sat at his kitchen table with Celestine's contract spread out before him. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out. Comprehensive family security package, educational trust fund, relocation assistance, medical benefits including retroactive debt forgiveness. The last item made him pause. Retroactive debt forgiveness. That meant Carmen's medical bills. The crushing weight that had defined his financial life for 4 years would simply disappear. Maya's asthma medications, Diego's dental work that he'd been putting off, the eye exam he needed but couldn't afford, all of it covered. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Beautiful children, would be a shame if something happened to them. Alger's blood turned to ice. He immediately called Dr. Cross, who answered on the first ring. "I was expecting your call," she said calmly. "What did the message say?" "How did you?" "Because we've been monitoring communications since the news story broke." The text came from a burner phone purchased yesterday in downtown Millbrook. "We're tracking it now." "Are my kids safe?" They're completely safe. Look out your window." Alger peered through the blinds. The black sedan was still there, but now he could see two additional vehicles he hadn't noticed before, one at each end of the block. As he watched, a figure in dark clothing walked casually along the sidewalk, speaking quietly into an earpiece. "Mr. Boulevard, I need you to understand that whether you accept Celestine's offer or not, your family is under our protection until this threat is neutralized. But if you decline the position, that protection ends when the immediate danger passes. If you accept, it becomes permanent." After hanging up, Alger found himself staring at his children's bedroom door. Maya had fallen asleep clutching her new lab coat, and Diego had his mathematics portfolio on his nightstand like other kids kept comic books. For the first time in their lives, his children were excited about learning, dreaming about futures that seemed achievable. Monday morning brought an unexpected call from Maya's school. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, sounded unusually cheerful when she asked Alger to come in for a meeting about Maya's exceptional academic potential. "We've had some interest from the Thornfield Educational Initiative," Mrs. Henderson explained when Alger arrived at her office an hour later. "They're offering a full scholarship for gifted students, private tutoring, advanced materials, even summer programs at prestigious universities." Alger's stomach tightened. Thornfield. The same name that had been mentioned when Diego was supposedly selected for extra math help. The representative was quite impressed with Maya's test scores and her natural curiosity. Apparently, she made quite an impression during her visit to the Children's Museum this weekend. "What visit to the museum?" Alger asked, though he already knew the answer. "Oh, I assumed you knew. Maya mentioned spending Saturday with some educational specialists working on science projects." The Thornfield representative said Maya showed remarkable aptitude for both chemistry and biology. That afternoon, Diego came home from school with news that his math teacher, Mr. Petrov, had recommended him for an accelerated program that would allow him to take calculus at the community college while finishing 8th grade. "Dad, can you believe it? College classes!" Mr. Petrov said someone from an education foundation called the school today and offered to pay for everything: books, tuition, even transportation to campus. Alger felt the walls closing in around him. Everywhere he turned, Celestine's influence was reshaping his children's lives, opening doors that had been locked by poverty and circumstance. But was it generosity or manipulation? His phone rang during dinner, Romano's diner calling to tell him his weekend shifts had been temporarily covered by a staffing agency while they underwent some kind of efficiency review. The hospital called an hour later with similar news about his Thursday night cleaning job. "We understand you've been under some stress recently," his supervisor at Millbrook General said when Alger pressed for details. "The administration thought you might benefit from a lighter schedule while you consider some new opportunities." By Tuesday, it was clear that his normal life had been completely disrupted. His extra jobs were gone, his children were being courted by educational programs he'd never heard of, and mysterious benefactors seemed to be smoothing every rough edge in their daily existence. The groceries kept appearing, the bills were somehow being paid, and even his Honda had mysteriously received a full tune-up while parked at the hospital. "Dad," Maya asked that evening as they walked through their neighborhood, accompanied, Alger now realized, by discreet security personnel who maintained careful distances, "why is everything getting so much better all of a sudden?" It was a child's question, innocent and direct. But it cut straight to the heart of Alger's growing unease. Everything was getting better, too much better, too fast, in ways that felt orchestrated rather than organic. Wednesday brought a call from Celestine herself. "I hope you've had time to consider our conversation," she said, her voice warm but professional. "I know it's a lot to process." "It is, but I have to ask, have you been pulling strings behind the scenes? My jobs, my kids, schools, the way everything seems to be falling into place." There was a pause. "I've been ensuring that you have the space to make a clear decision without the pressure of immediate financial stress." Is that manipulation? Perhaps. But sometimes, Alger, people need to see what their life could look like before they can make a choice about their future. And if I say no? Then everything returns to exactly the way it was before we met. The educational opportunities disappear, the security ends, the bills come back. Your children go back to dreaming small dreams limited by your small budget. Her words stung because they were true. In just a few days, Maya and Diego had transformed from children focused on survival to children excited about possibilities. They were reading advanced books, solving complex problems, talking about college and careers and futures that stretched beyond the boundaries of Millbrook Heights. "I need more time," Alger said. "Of course, but Alger, while you're thinking, ask yourself this. What would Carmen want for Maya and Diego? What would she say about an opportunity to give them everything she dreamed they could have?" That night, Alger stood in his children's doorway watching them sleep. Maya clutched a stuffed animal in one hand and a book about molecular biology in the other. Diego had fallen asleep at his desk, working on calculus problems that were supposed to be impossible for someone his age. For the first time in years, his children were dreaming big dreams. The question was whether those dreams were worth the price Celestine was asking and whether he was brave enough to find out what that price really was. Outside, the security detail maintained their vigilant watch, and somewhere in her mansion, a billionaire heiress waited for his answer. Everything in his life had changed in less than a week, but Alger couldn't shake the feeling that the biggest changes were still coming. Tomorrow, he would give Celestine his decision. Tonight, he would try to figure out why the most generous offer of his life felt like the most dangerous choice he'd ever faced. Thursday morning arrived with an unexpected twist that shattered any remaining illusion of normalcy. Alger woke to find a formal invitation slipped under his door, elegant cardstock with gold embossing, requesting his presence at the Montenegro Foundation's annual gala that evening. Black tie required. It noted in elegant script, followed by an address he recognized as the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Continental Hotel. At the bottom, in Celestine's handwriting, "It's time you saw the full scope of what you'd be joining. A car will collect you at 7 p.m. The children are invited as well. Drive Cross has arranged appropriate attire." Alger stared at the invitation over his morning coffee, realizing that Celestine was escalating their relationship to a very public level. A foundation gala meant hundreds of people, media coverage, photographs. There would be no going back to anonymity after tonight. His phone rang before he could fully process the implications. Rosa, his babysitter, sounded breathless with excitement. "Mr. Boulevard, the most beautiful woman just delivered the most gorgeous dresses for Maya and a tuxedo for Diego. She said they're for some fancy party tonight. There are even shoes and everything." When Alger arrived at Rosa's apartment to see his children, he found Maya twirling in a midnight blue dress that looked like it belonged on a red carpet, while Diego stood uncomfortably in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that made him look years older. "Dad, do we really get to go to a ball like in the movies?" Maya's eyes sparkled with excitement, but Alger could see Diego's uncertainty. His 12-year-old son was old enough to sense that something significant was happening, even if he couldn't articulate what. "It's a charity event, sweetie. A fancy dinner where people raise money to help sick children." "Will there be dancing?" Maya asked, practicing a curtsy she'd apparently learned from Dr. Cross. "Probably," Alger admitted, his stomach tightening as he imagined navigating a world of billionaires and socialites with his children by his side. The limousine that arrived at exactly 7 p.m. was unlike anything Alger had ever seen, longer than their entire apartment, with leather seats softer than his own bed, and a minibar stocked with juice boxes and gourmet snacks for the children. Maya was beside herself with delight, while Diego maintained the careful composure he'd developed since becoming the man of the house at 8 years old. "Mr. Boulevard," the driver said through the partition, "Miss Ashworth Montenegro asked me to give you this." He handed back an envelope containing a brief note. "Tonight you'll understand why your decision matters to more than just our two families. Trust me." The Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Continental was a glittering wonderland of crystal chandeliers, white orchids, and people wearing clothing that probably cost more than Alger's annual salary. As they entered, heads turned, not with the curiosity he'd expected, but with recognition. Several people nodded and smiled as if they knew who he was, which seemed impossible. "Daddy, everyone's looking at us," Maya whispered, unconsciously moving closer to his side. Before Alger could respond, Celestine appeared as if from nowhere, wearing a stunning silver gown that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. But it wasn't her appearance that took his breath away. It was the way the entire room seemed to shift its attention when she moved, the subtle deference of people who clearly recognized her power and influence. "Alger, Maya, Diego, She greeted them warmly, but her eyes held an intensity that suggested tonight was about more than charity fundraising. "Thank you for coming. There are some people I'd very much like you to meet." What followed was a carefully orchestrated introduction to a world Alger had never imagined existed. He met the pediatric surgeon whose childhood cancer research was funded by the Montenegro Foundation, research that had saved over 10,000 children in the past 5 years. He spoke with the director of a scholarship program that had sent hundreds of underprivileged students to medical school. He shook hands with the architect of a hospital network in South America where every treatment was provided free of charge. Each person they met seemed to know who Alger was, congratulating him on his, quote, heroic actions and expressing excitement about his, quote, upcoming role with the foundation. The implication was clear. Celestine had already announced his participation to her inner circle, despite the fact that he hadn't actually agreed to anything yet. "Dad," Diego said quietly during a brief moment when they were alone, "that man over there said you were going to be helping children like Mom used to. What did he mean?" Before Alger could answer, the lights dimmed, and Celestine took the stage. The transformation was remarkable, from the warm, vulnerable woman he'd come to know to a commanding presence who clearly belonged in front of an audience of the world's most powerful people. "5 years ago," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "my younger brother Marcus died believing that healthcare should be a human right, not a privilege determined by wealth. Tonight, I want to tell you about someone who embodies that same belief. Someone whose actions proved that heroism isn't about headlines or recognition, but about choosing to help when help is needed most." Alger's stomach dropped as he realized where this was going. 2 weeks ago, a single father named Alger Boulevard risked his life to save a stranger from armed criminals. He didn't know who I was, didn't expect any reward, and had every reason to prioritize his own safety over mine. He acted purely from moral conviction, the same conviction that drives everything the Montenegro Foundation represents. The spotlight found Alger in the crowd, and suddenly hundreds of faces were turned toward him. Maya gripped his hand tightly while Diego stood straighter, his young face showing pride mixed with confusion. Mr. Boulevard represents something this industry desperately needs. Someone who understands that behind every medical crisis is a family. Someone who knows what it means to choose between medication and groceries, between hope and financial reality. That's why I'm proud to announce that he has agreed to lead our new family advocacy division, ensuring that no parent will ever have to watch their child suffer because they can't afford treatment. The applause was thunderous, but Alger barely heard it over the roaring in his ears. She had just announced his acceptance of a position he hadn't actually accepted in front of hundreds of witnesses, with his children beside him listening to every word. As the presentation continued with slides showing the foundation's global impact, hospitals built, medications distributed, families saved, Alger felt the weight of manipulation settling around him like a trap. Every person he'd met tonight, every introduction, every conversation had been designed to show him the good his participation could accomplish. But more importantly, it had been designed to make backing out nearly impossible. During the dinner that followed, as Maya chatted excitedly with a Nobel Prize-winning physician about her dreams of becoming a scientist, and Diego discussed advanced mathematics with a foundation board member who'd graduated from MIT at 16, Alger realized the true scope of what Celestine had orchestrated. She hadn't just offered him a job. She'd introduced his children to a world where their intellectual gifts could flourish, where Maya's scientific curiosity could lead to discoveries that saved lives, where Diego's mathematical brilliance could be nurtured at the highest levels. She'd shown them possibilities that existed nowhere else, opportunities that would disappear if Alger walked away. "You manipulated me," he said quietly when Celestine joined him on the ballroom's terrace during a break between courses. "I showed you the truth," she replied, looking out over the city lights. "Your children are extraordinary, Alger. Maya has the kind of intuitive understanding of biological systems that takes most scientists decades to develop. Diego's mathematical mind could revolutionize how we model disease progression and treatment outcomes. But without proper resources, without the right opportunities, their gifts will be wasted. So this was never about me. It was about recruiting my children for your foundation." Celestine turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked genuinely hurt. "It was about all of you. Yes, your children are remarkable, but so are you. Do you have any idea how rare it is to find someone with both moral courage and practical experience with the problems we're trying to solve? And if I refuse, what happens to my kids' opportunities then? They end. The scholarships disappear, the tutoring stops, the advanced programs close their doors. Not because I'm vindictive, but because those opportunities exist within the Montenegro Foundation's network. They can't be separated from it. The music from the ballroom drifted out to the terrace as couples danced to a live orchestra. Through the windows, Alger could see Maya showing Diego a tablet displaying molecular structures, while a group of fascinated scientists watched. His children were thriving in this environment, their faces bright with intellectual excitement he'd never been able to give them. "There's something else," Celestine said softly. "Something I haven't told you yet. The real reason I need you specifically, beyond your character and your experience." Alger tensed, sensing that whatever came next would be the final piece of the puzzle, the revelation that would make walking away impossible. The assassination attempt in the parking garage wasn't the first. There have been others, and our intelligence suggests they'll escalate. I need someone close to me who I can trust, absolutely. Someone whose loyalty isn't based on money or career advancement. She paused, looking directly into his eyes. I need someone who would risk his life for a stranger because it's the right thing to do. But more than that, I need someone who could love me for who I am, not what I own. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Alger stared at her, finally understanding the true scope of what she was offering and what she was asking in return. This wasn't just about a job or his children's futures. Celestine Ashworth Montenegro, one of the world's most powerful women, was proposing something that would change everything he thought he knew about love, family, and the life he'd imagined for himself. The silence stretched between them on the terrace, broken only by the distant sound of the orchestra and the soft murmur of conversation from inside the ballroom. Alger felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet, leaving him suspended between everything he'd known and everything that suddenly seemed possible. "Love?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Celestine, we barely know each other." "Don't we?" She moved closer, her silver gown catching the light from the ballroom windows. "I know you're the kind of man who works 3 jobs to pay debts that aren't really yours. I know you put your children's needs before your own, every single day. I know you risked your life for a complete stranger without hesitation." Her voice grew softer. "And I know that when you look at me you see a person, not a bank account." Alger struggled to process what she was saying. "This is insane. You're talking about marriage to someone you met 2 weeks ago." "Am I?" Celestine reached into her small evening purse and withdrew a velvet box that made Alger's breath catch. "Because I'm not talking about a conventional marriage, Alger. I'm talking about a partnership. A union between 2 people who understand what it means to put family and purpose above everything else." She opened the box to reveal a ring that caught the moonlight like captured starfire. A single diamond surrounded by smaller stones in a setting that was both elegant and timeless. It was the kind of ring that belonged in movies, the kind that cost more than most people's houses. "Celestine, this is crazy? Impossible? Yes, it is. But so is everything else about our situation." She closed the box but kept it in her hands. "Let me explain what I'm actually proposing, because it's not what you think." Through the ballroom windows, Alger could see Maya dancing with Dr. Cross while Diego discussed something animatedly with a group of Foundation scientists. His children looked like they belonged in this world of possibility and privilege, their faces bright with the kind of joy he'd been unable to give them. "I'm proposing a marriage of partnership, not passion, at least not initially. I need someone I can trust completely, someone who can stand beside me as we face the threats against the Foundation. You need security for your family and resources to give Maya and Diego the futures they deserve." Celestine's voice was steady, businesslike, but Alger could hear the underlying vulnerability. "What I'm offering is a legal union that provides protection, legitimacy, and opportunity for all of us. And love? Where does that fit into this business arrangement?" For the first time since he'd known her, Celestine looked uncertain. "Love is... I hope love might grow from respect and shared purpose. I've seen it happen. My parents had an arranged marriage that began as a business alliance and became one of the great love stories of their generation." Alger found himself thinking of Carmen, of the effortless way love had bloomed between them in college, natural and uncomplicated. What Celestine was proposing felt like the opposite, calculated, strategic, built on need rather than desire. What would this marriage actually look like? Day to day, I mean. We would live as a family, you, me, Maya, and Diego. There's a wing of my estate that could be converted into private quarters for you and the children, your own space while still being part of the larger household. The children would attend the finest schools, have access to tutors and opportunities that most kids only dream about. You would work alongside me at the foundation, helping families like yours used to be. She paused, looking out over the city lights. And publicly, we would present as a united front. The widowed nurse who became a philanthropist, the heiress who chose love over status. It's a story the media would embrace, and one that would make it much harder for my enemies to target either of us. You're talking about using our relationship as PR. I'm talking about protecting our relationship with PR. Celestine's voice grew firmer. Alger, these people who want me dead, they've killed before. They won't hesitate to go after anyone close to me. But a husband, especially one with your background and public sympathy, that's much harder to touch, without creating a scandal they can't afford. The orchestra inside began playing a waltz, and couples moved onto the dance floor in perfect synchronization. Alger watched through the windows, struck by how choreographed it all looked, how everyone seemed to know their role and play it flawlessly. And if I say no? What happens then? Then you go back to your life. The protection detail withdraws, the educational opportunities end, and you return to working 70 hours a week while watching your children's potential slowly suffocate under financial pressure. Celestine's words were matter-of-fact, but they hit like physical blows. The assassination attempts against me will continue, and eventually they might succeed. The foundation's work will be disrupted, maybe destroyed. Thousands of families who could have been helped will remain trapped in medical poverty. That's not fair. You're making me responsible for consequences that aren't my fault. No, I'm showing you the power to affect consequences that matter. How many nurses do you work with who became nurses because they wanted to help people, only to find themselves constrained by insurance companies, hospital bureaucracies, and patients who can't afford the care they need? Celestine turned to face him fully. I'm offering you the chance to help on a scale you never imagined possible. A new thought occurred to Alger, one that made his stomach tighten. My children. How do Maya and Diego fit into this arrangement? Are they just part of the package deal? They're the most important part. Celestine's voice grew warm again. Alger, I've spent the past week watching your children discover their own potential. Maya has an intuitive understanding of biological systems that could lead to breakthrough medical research. Diego's mathematical gifts could revolutionize how we model disease progression and treatment outcomes. But more than that, they're good kids. Kind, curious, resilient kids who deserve every opportunity in the world. And you'd want to be their, what? Stepmother? I'd want to be their advocate, their supporter, their protector. Someone who ensures they never have to choose between their dreams and their family's survival. She paused. I lost my own parents when I was 16, Alger. I know what it's like to grow up too fast, to carry responsibilities that should belong to adults. I would never want Maya and Diego to experience that. A couple emerged onto the terrace, laughing softly as they walked to the railing. Alger recognized them from the evening's introductions. A Nobel laureate and his wife, both in their 70s, both still obviously devoted to each other. They nodded politely and moved to the far end of the terrace, giving Alger and Celestine privacy, while serving as a reminder of what long-term partnership could look like. There's something else, Celestine said quietly, something I haven't told you about the Foundation's work. We're not just treating diseases, Alger. We're preventing them. Our research teams are on the verge of developing vaccines that could eliminate childhood cancer entirely, treatments that could end hereditary heart disease, cures for conditions that destroy families like yours, was destroyed. Alger thought of Carmen, of the months of watching her fight a battle they couldn't afford to win. You're talking about changing the world. I'm talking about honoring your wife's memory by ensuring that no other family has to watch someone they love die from a treatable condition because they lack resources. Celestine's voice grew intense. Carmen spent her last months researching experimental treatments, looking for hope in medical journals and clinical trials. What if those treatments had been available to her? What if cost had never been a factor? The weight of possibility settled over Alger like a blanket. Everything Celestine was offering, the security, the opportunities for his children, the chance to work on problems that mattered, came with one condition that seemed both impossible and inevitable. You want an answer tonight, don't you? I want you to think about what you'd tell Maya and Diego 10 years from now if you walked away from this chance. What you'd tell yourself when you're working your third job to pay for textbooks they need for courses you can't afford. Celestine reopened the ring box. This isn't just about us, Alger. It's about the kind of world we want to build for the people we love. Inside the ballroom, the music swelled as more couples joined the dance. Maya appeared at the window, waving excitedly when she spotted her father. Diego stood beside her, looking more mature than his 12 years, watching Alger with an expression that suggested he understood more about this moment than anyone gave him credit for. Celestine followed his gaze. They're remarkable children. They deserve a remarkable future. Alger looked at the ring, at the woman holding it, at his children's faces pressed against the window. Everything about this moment felt surreal, like he was living in someone else's life. But it was his life, his choice, his chance to give his family everything they'd ever needed, and more than they'd ever dreamed possible. The question was whether he was brave enough, or desperate enough, to say yes to a proposal that would change everything he thought he knew about love, marriage, and the price of dreams coming true. Alger asked for 1 week to give Celestine his answer, though he suspected she already knew what it would be. As the limousine carried them home from the gala, Maya chattering excitedly about the princess party, while Diego sat quietly processing everything he'd witnessed. Alger felt the weight of the ring box in his jacket pocket like a time bomb, counting down to an explosion that would reshape their entire world. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans for giving him space to think. Monday morning brought the first sign that accepting Celestine's proposal wouldn't be as straightforward as either of them had anticipated. Alger arrived at work to find his supervisor, Janet Morrison, waiting with an expression he'd never seen before. Part concern, part official business, and part something that looked like fear. "Alger, we need to talk. My office now." The meeting that followed felt like stepping into an alternate reality. Present were Janet, the hospital's chief administrator, Dr. Patricia Henley, a woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as, quote, legal counsel, and a man in a government badge who flashed credentials too quickly for Alger to read clearly. "Mr. Boulevard," Dr. Henley began, her voice carefully neutral, "we've received some concerning information about your recent associations. Information that raises questions about your continued employment here." "I'm sorry, what?" Alger looked around the room, noting how everyone seemed uncomfortable except the government official, who watched him with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to reading people for lies. The legal counsel slid a folder across the table. "Are you familiar with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, Mr. Boulevard? Specifically, the provisions regarding Americans who enter into financial relationships with individuals under federal investigation." Alger opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photographs. Him entering Celestine's estate, him at the gala, him in the limousine with his children. But it was the documents underneath that made his blood run cold. Official-looking papers with government seals, dense legal language, and Celestine's name highlighted in yellow throughout. "The Montenegro Foundation is currently under investigation by multiple federal agencies," the government official said, speaking for the first time. "Money laundering, tax evasion, and suspected connections to foreign entities that may not have America's best interests at heart." "That's impossible," Alger said, though his voice sounded weak even to himself. "The foundation helps children. They fund medical research." "Many criminal organizations hide behind charitable work, Mr. Boulevard. It's excellent cover for moving large amounts of money across international borders." The official leaned forward. "We're particularly interested in Miss Ashworth Montenegro's recent pattern of recruiting Americans with specific skill sets. Healthcare workers, engineers, people with access to sensitive infrastructure." Janet finally spoke, her voice heavy with regret. "Alger, the hospital has no choice. Until this investigation is resolved, we can't have an employee who's under federal scrutiny. You're being placed on indefinite administrative leave." The words hit him like physical blows. Administrative leave. "Janet, I have children to support. I can't afford." "The decision is final," Dr. Henley interrupted. "Security will escort you out. Your personal belongings will be mailed to you." 2 hours later, Alger sat in his Honda in the hospital parking lot, staring at a cardboard box containing 4 years' worth of personal items from his locker. His phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from Dr. Cross, from unknown numbers, from what appeared to be reporters who had somehow gotten his contact information. He turned it off, unable to face the implications of what was happening. The drive home felt like a funeral procession. Everything Celestine had built for them, the security, the opportunities, the sense of possibility, was crumbling faster than he could process. When he pulled into his apartment complex, he saw news vans parked along the street and a crowd of reporters waiting near his building entrance. "Mr. Boulevard, is it true you're romantically involved with Celestine Ashworth Montenegro?" "Sir, can you comment on allegations that the Montenegro Foundation is under federal investigation?" "How do you respond to claims that you're being used as a front for international money laundering?" Alger drove past his own building, unable to face the media's circus. His phone, when he finally turned it back on, showed 37 missed calls and dozens of text messages. Most were from numbers he didn't recognize, but several were from his children's schools. The call to Maya's principal revealed the extent of the nightmare unfolding around them. "Mr. Boulevard, I'm afraid we've had to place Maya in a secure location within the school. There have been reporters attempting to speak with students, asking questions about her relationship with the Montenegro Foundation. We've also had some concerning individuals claiming to be child welfare investigators." "Child welfare?" Alger's hands shook as he gripped the phone. "What are you talking about?" "Someone filed a report suggesting that your children may be in an unsafe environment due to your alleged criminal associations. Social Services is required to investigate any such claims, regardless of their validity." Diego's school delivered similar news. His son was being kept in the main office while administrators tried to figure out how to handle the situation. The special mathematics program he'd been so excited about had been, quote, temporarily suspended pending clarification of funding sources. By the time Alger finally reached Dr. Cross, he was nearly panicking. "Alger, where are you? We've been trying to reach you all day." Her usual calm was strained. "The situation is more serious than we anticipated." "More serious? I've lost my job. My children are being investigated by Social Services, and there are reporters camped outside my apartment asking if I'm a money launderer. Listen to me carefully. Do not go home. Do not speak to any reporters. The people investigating the foundation have decided to use you as leverage against Celestine, and they're willing to destroy your life to do it." "What people? Who's behind this?" There was a pause. "The same pharmaceutical companies we discussed before. They've used their connections in government to initiate investigations designed to cripple the foundation's work. Your relationship with Celestine made you a perfect target." Alger found himself laughing, a sound that bordered on hysteria. "So let me get this straight. Celestine's enemies are trying to destroy me to get to her, which means accepting her proposal would make me an even bigger target, but refusing it means my children lose everything they've gained?" "That's an accurate summary, yes. And where is Celestine in all this? Why isn't she fixing it?" Another pause. "She's in emergency meetings with her legal team and federal investigators. The attacks on the foundation are more coordinated than we initially realized. They're not just going after her finances. They're questioning her citizenship status, her right to operate charitable organizations in the United States, even her mental competency to manage her inheritance." Alger pulled into a gas station parking lot, needing to stop the car before his shaking hands caused an accident. "Dr. Cross, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is any of this true? Is Celestine actually involved in anything illegal?" "No." The answer was immediate and firm. But in situations like this, the truth is less important than what can be proven or disproven. And proving innocence takes time. Time during which your life and your children's lives will be under constant scrutiny. As if to emphasize her point, Alger's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice kids. Would hate to see them end up in foster care while their father sorts out his legal troubles." "Dr. Cross," Alger said quietly, "I think someone just threatened my children. Forward me that text immediately. We're tracing all communications and building a case for harassment and intimidation." Her voice grew urgent. "Alger, I need you to bring Maya and Diego to a safe location. There's a secure facility where they can stay while we sort this out." "A secure facility? You're talking about hiding my children like they're in witness protection." "I'm talking about protecting them from people who see them as tools to use against their father. People who've already demonstrated they're willing to destroy innocent lives to achieve their goals." Alger closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices crushing down on him. Accept Celestine's proposal and become a permanent target for people with unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. Refuse it and watch his children's futures disappear while living under constant threat from enemies he'd never chosen to make. "There's something else," Dr. Cross continued. "Celestine wants to see you tonight. She says she has a solution, but it requires a decision that can't be undone." "What kind of solution?" "The kind that would protect your family permanently, but would also mean there's no going back to the life you knew." "She'll explain when you see her." As Alger sat in the gas station parking lot, watching normal people live normal lives while his world collapsed around him, he realized that the choice he'd thought he was making, whether to accept a marriage proposal from a wealthy woman, had transformed into something much more fundamental. He was choosing between safety and freedom, between protecting his children and preserving his independence, between a life of luxury with strings attached and a life of struggle without guarantees. And somewhere in a mansion across town, Celestine Ashworth Montenegro was preparing to make him an offer that would eliminate every other option except the one she wanted him to choose. The meeting location Celestine chose was unexpected. Not her mansion or a fancy restaurant, but the basement conference room of St. Catherine's Community Center in the poorest district of Millbrook Heights. When Alger arrived, escorted by Dr. Cross through a maze of back alleys to avoid the media circus that now followed his every move, he found Celestine sitting at a folding table surrounded by boxes of documents, looking more like a public defender preparing for trial than a billionaire heiress. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to a plastic chair across from her. The fluorescent lighting was harsh, casting deep shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and enormous stress. "I know today has been difficult." "Difficult?" Alger couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "I lost my job, my children are in hiding, and I'm apparently now a person of interest in a federal investigation. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it." "I know. And I'm going to fix it." Celestine pulled out a laptop and turned it toward him. On the screen was a video conference call showing what appeared to be an FBI field office, with several agents visible around a conference table. "I want you to meet Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, who's been investigating the real criminals behind today's attacks." One of the agents on screen leaned forward. "Mr. Boulevard, what happened to you today was orchestrated by a network of individuals who've been targeting the Montenegro Foundation's work for the past 2 years. We've been building a case against them, and your situation has provided us with the final evidence we needed." Alger looked between the screen and Celestine, confused. "Evidence of what?" "Conspiracy, racketeering, abuse of federal investigative resources, and witness intimidation," Agent Martinez replied. "The people who arranged for your termination, who sent those threatening texts about your children, who filed false reports with social services, they're all connected to a pharmaceutical lobbying firm called Meridian Strategic Solutions." Celestine pulled out a thick folder. Meridian represents 12 major pharmaceutical companies whose profit margins would be threatened by the Montenegro Foundation's work. Over the past 18 months, they've spent over $50 million trying to discredit our research, block our patent applications, and destroy our ability to operate in the United States. "But why target me? I'm nobody." "Because you became somebody the moment you saved my life," Agent Martinez said from the screen. "They've been monitoring everyone in my orbit, looking for pressure points they could exploit. When you appeared as a potential romantic interest, they saw an opportunity to create a scandal that would damage both the Foundation's reputation and my personal credibility." Celestine opened the laptop and began typing rapidly. "Watch this." The screen filled with a recording, poor quality, but clearly showing a conference room where several people in expensive suits were discussing strategy. "The nurse angle is perfect," a woman's voice said. "Single father, struggling financially, suddenly involved with a billionaire. We can spin it as gold digging, maybe even extortion. Get some reporters to dig into his background. Suggest he's using his children to manipulate her emotions." "What about federal pressure?" a man's voice asked. "Already in motion. We have contacts at Treasury and Justice who owe us favors. A few calls suggesting money laundering, maybe ties to foreign entities. And they'll have to open an investigation whether they want to or not." Alger felt sick. "They planned all of this?" "Every detail," Celestine confirmed. "The timing of the investigation, the media leaks, even the threats against your children. It was all designed to force you away from me and discredit the Foundation simultaneously." Agent Martinez reappeared on screen. "Mr. Boulevard, we'd like your permission to use your situation as part of a larger sting operation. We believe we can expose the entire network, but it requires you to appear to play along with their pressure campaign." "What does that mean exactly?" Celestine closed the laptop and looked directly at him. "It means publicly rejecting my marriage proposal, appearing on camera to denounce me as manipulative and dangerous, claiming you were coerced into the relationship and that you're cooperating with federal investigators." The silence that followed was deafening. "You want me to betray you, publicly?" "I want you to help me destroy the people who threatened your children," Celestine replied fiercely. "These same people have been responsible for blocking medications that could save thousands of lives, for ensuring that treatments remain expensive enough to bankrupt families like yours used to be. They've corrupted federal agencies, bribed officials, and destroyed anyone who gets in their way." Dr. Cross, who had been silent until now, placed a tablet on the table. "Alger, I want you to see something." The screen showed news footage from 3 months ago, a woman testifying before Congress about her daughter's death from a rare disease. This is Patricia Kellerman. Her 8-year-old daughter died because the medication that could have saved her costs $40,000 per treatment. The Montenegro Foundation had developed a version that would cost $12, but Meridian's clients prevented it from reaching the market. "How many families like the Kellermans are there?" Celestine asked quietly. "How many children die because these people prioritize profit over human life? How many parents work themselves to death trying to afford medications that could be produced cheaply if greed weren't the deciding factor?" Alger thought of Carmen, of the experimental treatments they couldn't afford, of the choices between medication and groceries that define too many families' daily lives. "What's the endgame here? If I do this, if I publicly denounce you, what happens next?" The sting operation unfolds over 6 weeks. Agent Martinez explained through the laptop. "We track the money, document the coordination between Meridian and their government contacts, and build an airtight case for prosecution. Meanwhile, you and your children are in protective custody under assumed identities." "And after 6 weeks?" Celestine reached across the table and took his hands. "After 6 weeks, when the arrests are made and the conspiracy is exposed, you have a choice. You can return to your old life. I'll ensure your job is restored, your reputation cleared, your children's opportunities preserved. Or you can marry me for real, not because of threats or manipulation or desperate circumstances, but because you've chosen to be part of something larger than yourself. Because you've decided that love can grow from shared purpose and mutual respect." Alger stared at their joined hands, thinking about everything that had brought them to this moment. And if something goes wrong with the sting? If these people figure out what we're doing? "Then we disappear," Celestine said simply. "New identities, new country, new lives. The Montenegro Foundation's work continues through international channels, and your children grow up safe but forever separated from everything they've ever known." The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. 6 weeks of pretending to hate the woman who'd offered his family everything they'd ever needed. 6 weeks of his children thinking their father had chosen fear over love, safety over courage. 6 weeks of the world believing he was exactly the kind of man who would abandon someone who needed him when the pressure became too great. "There's something else," Dr. Cross said quietly, "something we haven't told you about Maya and Diego." Alger's blood chilled. "What about them?" "They're not just academically gifted, Alger. Maya's understanding of biological systems isn't just intuitive, it's unprecedented. And Diego's mathematical abilities. He solved a problem last week that our top researchers have been working on for months." Celestine leaned forward. "Your children aren't just smart, they're genuinely extraordinary, and Meridian knows it." "They want to recruit them," Agent Martinez said from the screen. "Not now, but in a few years when they're older. They see Maya and Diego as potential assets. brilliant minds who could be shaped to serve corporate interests rather than humanitarian ones. The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just about destroying Celestine or the Foundation. It was about controlling the next generation of medical research, ensuring that even the most brilliant minds served profit rather than purpose. So my choice isn't really between accepting or rejecting your proposal, Alger said slowly. My choice is between fighting these people or letting them win. That's exactly right, Celestine confirmed. And if we fight them and win, we don't just save the Foundation's work. We save every family that would benefit from affordable medications, every child who deserves treatment regardless of their parents' bank account, every person who believes that healthcare should be a human right, not a luxury commodity. Outside the community center, Alger could hear sirens. Whether police, ambulance, or fire department, he couldn't tell. But the sound reminded him that somewhere in the city, people were facing medical emergencies. Families were receiving devastating diagnoses. Parents were making impossible choices between their children's health and their financial survival. He thought of Carmen again, of her final months spent researching treatments they couldn't afford. He thought of Maya's excitement about science, of Diego's mathematical gifts, of the kind of world he wanted them to inherit. "If I do this," he said finally, "if I publicly reject you and cooperate with this sting operation, I need one guarantee. Name it. No matter what happens, no matter how dangerous it gets, my children's safety comes first, above the Foundation, above the sting operation, above everything else." Celestine smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. "Alger, that's exactly why I need you beside me. Because you understand that saving the world means nothing if we can't protect the people we love." He looked around the basement room, fluorescent lights, folding chairs, the smell of old coffee, and community meetings. It wasn't the romantic setting where most marriage proposals were accepted. But as Alger nodded his agreement to the most dangerous plan he'd ever heard, he realized that maybe love wasn't about perfect moments in perfect places. Maybe love was about choosing to stand beside someone when everything was falling apart, and trusting them to catch you when you fell. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 6 weeks after Alger had agreed to the most elaborate deception of his life. Standing behind the podium at the Millbrook Heights Community Center, wearing a suit that Dr. Cross had selected to make him look appropriately defeated and overwhelmed, Alger prepared to deliver the performance that would either destroy Celestine Ashworth Montenegro's enemies or get them all killed. The room was packed with reporters, federal agents posing as journalists, and what appeared to be half the city's population. Camera flashes created a strobe effect as Alger adjusted the microphone, his hands shaking with what everyone assumed was nervousness but was actually anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd learned devastating truths, "6 weeks ago, I made a statement supporting Celestine Ashworth Montenegro and her foundation. Today, I'm here to tell you that everything I said was a lie." The room erupted in murmurs and the clicking of camera shutters. Alger paused, letting the moment build, knowing that somewhere in the audience, representatives from Meridian Strategic Solutions were recording every word to use as evidence of their successful campaign. "I was coerced, manipulated, and threatened into defending someone I now know to be involved in serious criminal activities. The Montenegro Foundation is not the humanitarian organization it claims to be. It's a front for money laundering, tax evasion, and the kind of international corruption that threatens everything America stands for." As planned, Alger's voice cracked slightly, though the emotion was real, born from 6 weeks of watching his children adapt to life in protective custody, 6 weeks of pretending to hate the woman he'd grown to genuinely respect and care for. "Miss Ashworth Montenegro used my children as leverage, promising them educational opportunities and threatening to take them away if I didn't cooperate with her schemes. She exploited my financial desperation and my desire to provide for my family, turning my love for Maya and Diego into a weapon against my conscience." In the back of the room, Alger spotted Dr. Cross, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the dangerous part. "But I'm not just here to expose Celestine Ashworth Montenegro's crimes. I'm here to expose the people who've been protecting her, who've been paid to look the other way while she destroys American families and corrupts our institutions." Alger pulled out a manila folder, the same one Celestine had shown him 6 weeks ago, filled with evidence that the FBI had spent months gathering. I have documentation proving that certain pharmaceutical companies, working through a lobbying firm called Meridian Strategic Solutions, have been bribing federal officials to ignore the Montenegro Foundation's illegal activities. The room went silent. This wasn't in the script that Meridian had expected. These companies didn't want to stop the foundation because it was criminal. They wanted to stop it because it was cutting into their profits. Medications that save children's lives were being sold for thousands of dollars when they could be produced for pennies. When the Montenegro Foundation threatened to expose this price manipulation, these companies decided to destroy both the foundation and anyone associated with it. Alger opened the folder and began reading names, dates, and dollar amounts. With each revelation, he could see certain faces in the audience growing pale, people checking their phones frantically, and what looked like security personnel moving toward the exits. The investigation into my family, the threats against my children, the destruction of my career, all of it was orchestrated by Meridian Strategic Solutions at the request of pharmaceutical executives who care more about profit margins than human lives. Conva. As if on cue, the room's doors burst open as FBI agents flooded in, moving with practiced efficiency toward predetermined targets. Agent Martinez appeared at the podium beside Alger, speaking into the microphone with calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the FBI. We are executing federal warrants for the arrest of several individuals present today on charges of conspiracy, racketeering, and corruption of federal officials." The chaos that followed was both terrifying and satisfying. Alger watched as men and women in expensive suits were handcuffed and led away, their carefully constructed conspiracy collapsing in real time. Camera crews captured every moment, turning what was supposed to be his public humiliation into their public downfall. In the confusion, Celestine appeared beside him as if from nowhere, no longer the vulnerable woman from their secret meetings but every inch the powerful heiress who controlled billions of dollars and the will to use them for justice. "You were magnificent," she said quietly, taking his hand as FBI agents escorted the arrested conspirators past them. "I was so afraid you'd change your mind." "I nearly did, about 100 times." Alger squeezed her fingers, realizing that after 6 weeks of pretending to hate her, holding her hand felt like coming home. "Are Maya and Diego safe?" "More than safe. They're about to become the most protected children in America." Celestine gestured toward the back of the room where Dr. Cross was leading two familiar figures through the crowd. Maya and Diego, dressed in their finest clothes and wearing expressions of barely contained excitement, pushed through the chaos toward their father. "Dad!" Maya launched herself into his arms, and Alger felt 6 weeks of carefully controlled emotion threaten to overwhelm him. "Did we really help catch the bad guys?" Dr. Cross said we were like secret agents. Diego, trying to maintain his 12-year-old dignity but failing completely, wrapped his arms around both his father and sister. "That was the coolest thing ever. The FBI agents let us watch from the surveillance van, and they showed us how the recording equipment worked." Agent Martinez approached their small family reunion, her professional demeanor softened by obvious satisfaction. "Mr. Boulevard, thanks to your cooperation, we've arrested 16 individuals and identified corruption that reaches into multiple federal agencies. The pharmaceutical price manipulation scheme you helped expose has potentially saved thousands of lives." As the crowd in the community center began to disperse, Alger found himself standing with his children and the woman who had somehow become the center of his universe. The woman he was supposed to marry, not out of desperation or manipulation, but because they'd chosen each other after facing the worst the world could throw at them. "So what happens now?" he asked Celestine as reporters continued to shout questions from outside the building. "Now we disappear for a while. Let the media circus die down. Let the legal proceedings run their course." She smiled at Maya and Diego, who were comparing notes about their 6 weeks in protective custody, like it had been the world's most exciting summer camp. "I have a house in Switzerland where the children can attend international schools while we figure out our next steps." "Our next steps?" Alger caught the implication. Celestine reached into her purse and pulled out the same velvet ring box from the gala, somehow preserved through 6 weeks of deception and danger. "I believe you still owe me an answer to a certain question." Maya gasped with delight. "Dad, is Miss Celestine going to be our new mom?" The question hung in the air, simple in its childhood directness but profound in its implications. Alger looked at his children, Maya's face bright with hope, Diego trying to look mature but clearly excited about the possibility. He looked at Celestine, elegant and powerful but somehow vulnerable as she waited for his response. "Well," he said, taking the ring box from her hands, "I suppose I should ask properly." Getting down on one knee in the chaos of the community center, surrounded by FBI agents and lingering reporters, Alger opened the box and looked up at the woman who had transformed his world. "Celestine Ashworth Montenegro, will you marry me?" Her laughter was like music cutting through the noise around them. Yes, Alger Boulevard. Yes to marriage. Yes to partnership. Yes to building something beautiful together. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, camera flashes documented the moment when a struggling single father and a billionaire heiress chose love over fear, partnership over safety, and a shared future over the separate lives they could have led. But this wasn't the end of their story. As Alger kissed his fiancée while his children cheered and FBI agents continued their work around them, he realized this was actually the beginning. The beginning of a life where Maya and Diego would grow up believing they could change the world, where families like theirs would never have to choose between love and survival, and where two people who'd found each other in the most impossible circumstances would build something lasting from the ashes of everything they'd almost lost. The ring caught the light from the community center's fluorescent fixtures, sparkling like a promise of all the tomorrows they would face together. 2 years later, Alger stood in the gleaming lobby of the Carmen Boulevard Medical Research Center, watching his daughter Maya explain molecular structures to a group of visiting physicians, while his son Diego demonstrated a mathematical model that could predict treatment outcomes with unprecedented accuracy. The building bore Carmen's name not as a memorial to loss, but as a celebration of the dream she'd never had the chance to pursue. "She would have loved this," Celestine said softly, joining him near the wall of photographs that documented the center's achievements. Their wedding rings caught the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows, matching bands of platinum and diamond that had been exchanged 6 months ago in a ceremony attended by heads of state, Nobel laureates, and the families whose lives had been transformed by their work. "She would have loved seeing them so confident," Alger agreed, watching Maya field questions from doctors with 3 times her life experience, while Diego patiently walked a pharmaceutical CEO through calculations that challenged everything the man thought he knew about drug development costs. The Montenegro Foundation had grown beyond anything Celestine had originally envisioned. With the pharmaceutical conspiracy exposed and prosecuted, governments worldwide had begun investigating their own healthcare pricing structures. The Foundation's research had sparked a revolution in medical accessibility, forcing entire industries to justify why life-saving treatments cost thousands when they could be produced for dollars. "Mr. Boulevard," a familiar voice called from across the lobby. Agent Martinez, now Director Martinez of the FBI's Corporate Crime Division, approached with a tablet in hand and the satisfied expression of someone whose work had made a real difference. "The quarterly numbers are in. Treatment costs for the medications we've helped bring to market are down an average of 73% globally. We estimate the Foundation's work has saved over 2 million lives in the past 18 months. 2 million lives. The number was so large it felt abstract, but Alger had learned to think in terms of individual families. Mothers who could afford their children's insulin, fathers who didn't have to choose between cancer treatment and mortgage payments, children who would grow up healthy instead of dying from treatable diseases. "There's something else," Director Martinez continued, her tone shifting to something more personal. "The Patricia Kellerman Memorial Scholarship just graduated its first class. 37 students, all from families affected by medical bankruptcy, all now qualified nurses, doctors, and researchers. They're calling themselves the Carmen Corps in honor of your late wife's work." Alger felt his throat tighten. Carmen had always believed that the best way to honor tragedy was to prevent it from happening to others. Knowing that her name was inspiring a new generation of healthcare workers felt like the completion of a promise he'd made at her bedside years ago. "Dad." Maya's voice drew his attention back to the present. She stood with her group of visiting physicians, her 13-year-old face bright with the kind of intellectual excitement that reminded him daily of Carmen's passion for learning. "Dr. Yamamoto wants to know if you think teenagers should be allowed to participate in clinical research design." I told him about the Children's Advisory Board we started last month. The Children's Advisory Board had been Maya's idea, a panel of young patients and siblings who reviewed research proposals to ensure they addressed real-world concerns that adults often missed. It had revolutionized how the Foundation approached pediatric studies, leading to breakthroughs that might have taken years to achieve through traditional methods. "I think," Alger said carefully, that some of our best insights come from people who haven't been told that certain problems are impossible to solve. Dr. Yamamoto, a pediatric oncologist from Tokyo, nodded thoughtfully. In Japan, we have a saying, "The child's mind sees what the adult's experience has forgotten." Your daughter has reminded us of this wisdom. Across the lobby, Diego was wrapping up his presentation to a group that included pharmaceutical executives, government health officials, and foundation board members. At 14, he possessed mathematical abilities that consistently amazed the MIT professors who consulted on his projects, but more importantly, he developed an intuitive understanding of how numbers translated into human impact. The cost-benefit analysis is clear, Diego was saying, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd learned to trust his own insights. Every dollar spent on preventative care reduces treatment costs by an average of $12. But the real benefit isn't financial. It's measured in families that stay together, children who grow up healthy, and parents who don't have to watch their kids suffer. Celestine slipped her hand into Alger's, a gesture that had become natural over the months of their marriage but still filled him with wonder. Their relationship had evolved from the calculated partnership they'd originally negotiated into something deeper and more complex. A love built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the daily choice to support each other through the challenges of trying to change the world. "I have news," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of excitement that made him look at her more carefully. "The Swiss research team called this morning. The childhood cancer vaccine we've been developing, they're ready for human trials." The vaccine represented 5 years of research funded by the foundation, building on work that Carmen had begun during her own battle with cancer. If successful, it would eliminate the same disease that had taken so many lives, including potentially Carmen's if the research had been available earlier. "How soon?" Alger asked. 6 months for preliminary trials, maybe 2 years for full approval. But Alger, Celestine's voice grew softer. This is it. This is what everything has been building toward. A world where no parent has to hear the words, childhood cancer, and know their family's life is about to be destroyed. As if sensing the weight of the moment, Maya and Diego both appeared beside their parents, their separate conversations concluded. They'd grown into remarkable young people, confident without being arrogant, brilliant without losing their empathy, and grounded in the understanding that their privileges came with responsibilities. "Are we celebrating something?" Maya asked, noting the expressions on the adults' faces. "We're always celebrating something," Diego added with the dry humor he'd developed as he'd grown older. "Last week it was the malaria treatment. The week before that it was the diabetic children's summer camp program. Today we're celebrating the possibility of a world where kids like you never have to worry about certain kinds of sickness," Alger explained. "A world where being sick doesn't mean your family goes broke trying to get you better." Maya's eyes lit up with understanding, like Mom would have wanted. Exactly like Mom would have wanted. As the afternoon wound down and their guests departed with promises to collaborate on future projects, the Boulevard Montenegro family found themselves alone in the lobby of the research center that bore Carmen's name. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, illuminating the photographs of children whose lives had been saved, families whose financial disasters had been prevented, and communities whose health outcomes had been transformed. "You know what I've realized?" Alger said, looking around at everything they'd built together. "That night in the parking garage, when I decided to help you, I thought I was just stopping a robbery. I had no idea I was actually preventing the theft of millions of lives that pharmaceutical greed would have stolen." Celestine laughed, the sound echoing beautifully in the spacious lobby. "When I was trapped in that car, I thought my life was ending. I never imagined it was actually beginning." Maya and Diego exchanged the kind of look that siblings share when their parents are being particularly sentimental, but their smiles showed they understood the significance of the moment. "So what's next?" Diego asked, ever practical despite his young age. "Next," Celestine said, "we keep working. We keep fighting for families who can't fight for themselves. We keep building a world where healthcare is a human right, not a luxury commodity." "Next," Alger added, "we remember that changing the world isn't about grand gestures. It's about making the right choice when the choice matters, even when no one is watching." As they left the research center that evening, walking together toward the car that would take them home to the life they'd built from the ashes of everything they'd almost lost, Alger reflected on how profoundly their story had changed. What had begun as a simple act of courage in a parking garage had become a global movement for healthcare justice. What had started as a rescue had become a revolution, But perhaps most remarkably, what had begun as a marriage of convenience between strangers had become a love story that proved the most extraordinary transformations happen not when we seek them out, but when we choose to help someone in need and discover that saving them has actually saved ourselves. The ring on his finger caught the last light of the setting sun, sparkling like a promise that some happy endings are really just beautiful beginnings, and that the best legacy anyone can leave is a world where love, courage, and compassion matter more than wealth, power, or the cruel indifference that too often passes for wisdom. In the distance, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, each one a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are always points of light for those brave enough to reach for them. New. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.